Hello and welcome to the Irish History Show. My name is Cathal Brennan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-presenter John Dorney from the Irish Story website. If you'd like to listen to this or any previous episodes of the show, you can go to our website, irishhistoryshow.ie. You can follow us on Twitter, @IrishHistoryPod, or follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Irish History Show. On this episode of the show, we're very pleased to be joined by Alan Kinsella. Alan has his own website, irishelectionliterature.com, and anyone who follows Alan on Twitter or sees him on various blogs sees the amazing amounts of literature and paraphernalia from different political parties over the years, and it's a really, really useful resource for people who are interested in Irish politics. Alan, you're very welcome to the show. Alan, could you tell us about what first got you interested in collecting different types of Irish political paraphernalia?
Um, I suppose back in the early 80s, I would have started in the February 1982 election. Basically, there was people outside the polling stations, and also at the same time, the Litter and Taucon came on the same day. So it was either the day before or the morning of the election. So we'd go down to vote with our parents, and outside the polling station, you get given stuff and you just hold on to it. And in that particular election, Barry Desmond, who's the local TD, was canvassing outside the polling station, and he signed a canvas card saying, "To Alan, best wishes, Barry Desmond." And then there was another election in the November 82, and I kept the material from that too. And there was a by election in Dublin Central in 1983, and my grandaunt lived there and she kept the stuff for me. So over time, family, friends, and then people in school kept material for me. And by about 10 years later, I started to realize I gathered something, something quite unique because it was from everybody. It wasn't just there were people who collected stuff from a locality. There were people who might only collect Fianna Fáil material or Fine Gael material or whatever, or stuff from a certain the left or the right or wherever. So because I had everything, I realized I had something of interest, and over time that grew. I would have written to the parties, physically each election I would have got 6 stamps, and I would have written to the parties looking for material. Not always they have sent stuff back, and I always found that weird that I was the only, probably one of the few people that actually wanted the stuff that they were giving out. I would have started going to protests and stuff as well, just to collect material. Just gradually it grew, and it's now at a stage. I started the blog, the site, the Irish Lecture Literature site, maybe I think 10 or 12 years ago, just to start showing off material. And since that, it's grown. I have a network now. If there's any election, I have a network around the country of people who send me stuff. But there's also I have a lot of people who find stuff. Somebody passes away, or even they're moving office or something. They'll find material and they don't know what to do with it, so they get in contact with me and they send me stuff. And very often it's quite funny that it's people, an uncle dies or an aunt dies, and they go and clear out the house, and they never realize they were heavily involved in a certain type of politics or politics at all at some stage, and you find posters and stuff in the attic, or like, for instance, a friend's aunt passed away, and there was a load of Fianna Fáil posters from the 70s and 80s in the attic. They were due to go into a skip, and my friend said, "Oh God, Alan might like them." So it's just grown, and I've kind of, if people find stuff, they send it to me, and it's just a great way of expanding.
Alan, do you have a special interest or fascination for the small fringe parties?
Yeah, I do. So you're getting material in, like, very often, the election results supplements that come with the papers, and you do Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, whatever. But often you see a name you haven't seen before, and you're wondering, oh, what's that? Or you find there's an issue or something, or you have a leaflet from, say, for instance, the Tax Reform League from 1987. They weren't a registered party, yet there was a number of Tax Reform League candidates. So right, I have the Tax Reform League. And if you're a collector at all, if somebody is elected, so for instance, Tom Fox was elected for the Roscommon Hospital Action Committee to the Dáil, you want to be a completist. So you make sure you get his material as well. So you try and have all the material from people elected in the Dáil. But the small parties, they're so fascinating. There's so many ways, it can be a split, it can be a movement or a new idea, or it could be just one person thinking it's a great idea. But the small parties, they mightn't last 2 3 years, but their ideas maybe get taken by other people or enacted or whatever.
Yeah, do you think our electoral system contributes to the proliferation of small parties?
Yeah, of course it does. Like if you look across the water, like the first past the post, or a lot of electoral systems actually to protect it, I think, against the far right, you have to have a certain percentage in the national vote before you can take a seat in the national parliament. So it mitigates against smaller parties, and also I suppose they would have more regional and more powerful local government. So you might have small parties there. Although it's funny, when you look in certainly the 60s and 70s, there were so many places that just had Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael running. There weren't even, weren't the same amount of independents or smaller parties back then. For instance, parliamentary wise, the Trotskyist left. Very few countries have that number of parliamentarians from that tradition.
Well, it's interesting, as you say there, Alan, about the parts of the country that only have Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael candidates running in elections, because my mother is from West Sligo, and the Labour Party didn't even penetrate into that area. It really was pretty much Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or the odd independent, especially when it came to county council elections in that part of the county.
Yeah, like for instance, I was looking at something from the adoption referendum in 1979, Government Information Services publication. It says, "What is the attitude of the political parties towards the issue?" Answer: all three parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and Labour, are supporting the bill. That's it. And yet there was so much more in existence. Even if you think of Sligo, you had Declan Bree and the Sligo Leitrim Independent Socialist Organisation. It was there for years before it merged with the Labour Party. And funnily enough, at local level, there's literally a load of parties at local level. If you look, say, for Wicklow, there was the Wicklow First Movement in, I think, 1991. Then
Sorry, Alan,
Waterford.
The Wicklow First Movement. That sounds ominous.
Yeah, no, it was a split from Fine Gael. Actually, it was a split from Fine Gael, which arose from Shane Ross being imposed as a candidate. And three councillors left Fine Gael. I think it was three councillors left Fine Gael and stood as Wicklow First.
Did they have their own baseball caps, or?
No, that was no. There were George Jones, I think, was one of the candidates who was later a general election candidate. They would have got some elected. Yeah, the Waterford People's Party in 1985. That was a split from the Workers' Party. Had somebody elected. You go down to Cork, and you would have had the Cork Civic Party, the Cork Socialist Party. Public Christool would have started in Cork. In Kerry, you would have South Kerry Independence Alliance. And although not a party, if you think of the Healy Ray organisation, two TDs, three councillors, and a load of allied councillors as well. And that's another thing you see, like in TIP, you the Workers and Unemployed Action Group, but you also have, since the dual mandate was abolished, a lot of TDs now have their own small parties, in effect, organisations. So there's Team Lowry councillors in Tipperary, and especially since it's one constituency. And again, Matty McGrath has some councillors. There's a Lowry organisation that fights local elections as well as general elections. The same like the Gregory Group, if you think about it as well. That's another strand to it, in that you have TDs wanting eyes and ears in the ground, forming organisations that don't just stand in their own area, but in a wider area as well, to get what's going on in the county. Like for instance, I think Noel Grealish, there's a couple of ex-PD councillors in Galway who would be allied to him as well.
When we go back even to the foundations of the state, Alan, it's interesting when you look through the list of TDs that are elected, how many of these very small parties are there, right from independence.
Yeah, yeah. If you look at the first Dáil elections by 1923, you'd Republican, you'd farmers, independents, coming to Gael. And I suppose even Labour and stuff as well. You'd all the other things like the National League. You'd later on the National Centre Party, Clan na Talún, National Labour even, which was a split from Labour. Then Clan na Public. Interesting small ones then later on, like the Monetary Reform Party, which was kind of an idea taken from Canada, which Oliver J. Flanagan stood for. Even the Communist Party, of course, would have been fighting from the 20s onwards. And Larkin was elected in, what was it, June 27. And even in June 27, there was a group called the Blind Men's Party, stood two candidates, and they were protesting against the reduction in the blind pension in 1924 by, I think it was Ernest Blythe, was the Minister of Finance. But there was 5,000 people in receipt of the pension, and it was means tested, which meant that 1,000 blind people lost their pension. So there's all sorts of funny little groups at that stage, even in the 20s, fighting elections.
Would it be fair to say, Alan, that with the emergence of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, which people should remember is not actually at the time of the Civil War, it's later, but with the emergence of those two big parties, for a long time, the smaller fish kind of got swallowed up, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Occasional breakaways, like Clan na Public, even the far right, Altieri, Hirsrig. There was other groups, certainly in the 50s, you would have had Sine Gael, Young Ireland, National Action.
Sorry, Alan, Sine Gael?
Sine Gael, yeah.
What's that?
They were a small party. They fielded a candidate in the 1957 general election who didn't poll too well, but they were only founded a couple of weeks previously to it. They were formed by a group of Republican ex-prisoners, and Mr. Heffernan was the candidate. They intended to return to the old tradition of Irish nationalism, would reject the two home rule state set up in Ireland in 22, would eliminate British financial and economic control of Ireland and secure the freedom of independence of the whole people of Ireland. So that was their policy.
That's fairly standard Republican stuff from that era, though, right?
Yeah. But there's loads of things like that just last a brief period before not taking off. All these, like the National Action, they were pretty grim, far right, but they're fascinating all the same.
Well, one of the interesting things as well with the foundation as a free state is what becomes of Southern Unionism, and particularly at a local level, Unionism was pretty well represented in different parts of what would become the Free State. So, what becomes of these Southern Unionists in the 26 counties?
Well, it's just, if we go back before, actually, it's funny. I remember a few years ago talking to somebody, I'm sure you've come across the same, where they had it would have been a family, I won't name the family, but there would have been a family involved in politics, unionist politics throughout the era up until the foundation of the state. And during the War of Independence, they would have kept a load of material, but they literally burnt it all during the War of Independence in case it was found, and they were singled out for it. Obviously, there was unionists and stuff elected in Dublin for a couple of years, a couple of elections. And then on a local level, you had the likes of the Donegal Progressive Party and then the Protestant Association, which were in Monaghan, which kept, like, I think it could be 10 or 15 years ago when the last representative from those parties were on the council. So there was a big, long tradition of unionist representation there. Like, I think the last unionist to run in a Dáil election was a fella called John MacDonald in 1998, the Dublin North by-election, and he polled 107 votes. But it was really weird in that you had stuff like he was talking about the environment, Sellafield, he was anti-drugs, and all of a sudden you have a proper recognition of the 15,000 Dubliners who fought with Britain against the Nazis during World War II, Ireland to rejoin the Commonwealth, and then we go back to banning tobacco advertising, end to dumping of nuclear waste. Everything was normal, and it was just two particular points. But it was just weird seeing a unionist going up for a general election in the south. Now, there had been ones previously in the 80s. Patrick Melly was one. There was another fella, I can't remember his name, but he went up in Louth during the 80s, and his manifesto was for Bible readings in the Dáil. There was a good representation throughout the years at a local level, but it's kind of died out since.
The more mainstream, probably, path or trajectory for Southern Unionists was eventually joining Fine Gael, a lot of them. Okay, I'm thinking of the Dockwell family, for example.
Yeah, like the Dockwell family. But even, for instance, there was always in Cavan Monaghan, there was always a Protestant seat, supposedly. So you had Heather Humphreys taking over from Seymour Crawford, and so on and so on. So there was always a representation. Fine Gael was generally the home for them. All right.
We mentioned, Alan, that at the time of independence, there was a great proliferation of parties. In the middle of the 20th century, it tended to be narrowed down to the big two. But did we see a kind of resurgence of small parties towards, say, from the 1980s onwards?
A lot of it was on the left. So the Socialist Party of Ireland. There's been a couple of them, but the Socialist Party of Ireland, the crowd who produced, I think it was Super Spy and Advance, stood in '77. You would have had the split. I suppose any time Labour go into government, there's a new left wing organisation comes from a split out of Labour. So the Socialist Labour Party founded, and they stood in the 1979 local elections. They stood all over the country, no success. And then you had obviously the Marxist Leninists, the Communist Party, and the Communist Party itself, but the Communist Party of Ireland, Marxist Leninists, and they were gas. Like they used to do all the by-elections. Like I think it was '74. There was a by-election in Monaghan, and David Vipond stood for the Communist Party of Ireland, Marxist Leninist, and he was. I remember reading a report of his address to the voters of Monaghan, and he called on all progressive people to take up the study of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, and build revolutionary study groups to propagate scientific ideas and oppose national chauvinist and revisionist ideas in order to raise the level of the working class and to create the material conditions for the further consolidation of the proletarian party. So he was issuing that from a podium in Monaghan town.
Top
Now,
goal, I'd imagine.
yeah, he didn't. But that supposedly, he addressed them as fellow peasants or something like that. But that's like they're particularly like a lot of the far left, but they're particularly mad. You also have the international dimension with the far left, in that, for instance, they were allied to Albania. So you'd be reading Red Patriot or something. They're one of their magazines, and there'd be reports of the no price rises in socialist Albania. Prices only go down. There's no inflation. Things like that. It's just of a lovely little one of their posters which is a picture of Mao on it. It just says, "Don't vote for the national traitors." They're particularly fascinating, especially like they came from the internationalists in Trinity. You would have also had then later on, you had People's Democracy. You would have had the League for Workers' Republic would have been around then. Socialist Labour Party. Then, of course, the Democratic Socialist Party started in 81 or 82. All the time you would have had Militant, which then became the Socialist Party in the 90s. And now, of course, is split and became three in Rise, the new militant left crowd, and the Socialist Party themselves, or Solidarity. But there was a lot, like you had the Waterford People's Party, which was split from the Workers' Party, you had the People's Party of Ireland in Laois. Later on, then in the 90s, you would have had the proliferation of small Christian parties. Basically, in 1990, I think it was. Do you remember when the condoms and all were for sale in the Virgin shop on Aston Quay?
I do.
Yes.
And then, like, I was actually in college in Maynooth at the time, and we had a referendum for a condom machine to be put into the Students' Union. And I never took the poster, but the posters against it was self-control, not condoms. So it was legislation to make condoms more available, freely available. where previously it had been, I think, married couples had to get a prescription or something. So this promoted outrage amongst a lot of the Catholics. So a party called the Christian Principles Party was founded, and they actually ended up with a councillor, a lady called Sheila Hanley, in Sligo Corporation. This is why I love the small parties, is that I remember getting a leaflet from one of their candidates, a fellow called Sean Clerkin, and the slogan was "Jobs for Youth, not condoms." So it was just it stood out. But
Sorry, what?
jobs for youth, not condoms.
How does that make sense, though?
Doesn't. But it was all it was everything. The condoms was the final straw. See, up to this, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, you would have relied on them to keep an eye on all the social problems. They wouldn't be, they wouldn't be introducing condoms. They wouldn't be doing anything like that. And these people felt betrayed by both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Like, it's the same later on in the abortion referendums, in that you had people leaving. In '92, some of the anti-Albert propaganda was mad. It was horrific, actually, from some of the more Christian things. But people would have left, not in droves, but there would have been elements that would have left, especially Fianna Fáil would have left and joined the Christian Principles Party. That dissolved, and Nora Bennis and Gerard Casey joined together to found the Christian Solidarity Party. There was a falling out there somewhere, and Bennis formed the National Party, and there was also a crowd called the Christian Centrist Party, which, I don't know if you know, that Eamon Murphy fella who was very active. I think he ran in the European elections this time, but he would have been fairly extreme views on abortion. Even within these small parties, there was a lot of personality clashes. Richard Green was another one involved in a couple of those parties and ended up setting up his own party called Muintir na Éireann. So there was a load of small Catholic parties, and yet, despite them all literally agreeing the same thing, there was splits and everything because of personalities.
Brings back a lot of memories, Alan. I mean, the first thing is like what a different country it was back then, even in the early 90s.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. Like, I've stuff from. I remember one of the first exhibitions I did in the print museum. I had Alice Glenn's "Woman Voting for Divorce is like a turkey voting for Christmas." Young people coming up and just young people. I'm 50, but basically, anyone kind of 30 or younger were looking at it and going, "Oh my god, this is crazy. This is
Yeah,
absolutely
I
crazy."
remember that well, though. Yeah.
There's also the famous one as well, Alan. Hello, divorce, goodbye, daddy.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I have a leaflet that says, "God says vote no to divorce." Like, it's just, and indeed, that's one of the other things that, through collecting, that you document the social change. Like, it's not just, obviously, I have a lot of stuff, say, to do with abortion and stuff from '83 and before. I have a lot of the declares from the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael Ardèches over the years. But if you look in the '70s, '77, like, there's a motion that no married woman should take a job when there's a single person unemployed. Different. I suppose it's only a couple of years after the marriage bar, but it was it's a whole load of social. You get the other things like telephones in every house, or telephones in every school. Like, there was schools without telephones. Never mind houses. It was one of the education things. You get so much. Even, sorry, I'm diverting. If you go back to the '30s and you look at, like, Fianna Fáil produced some amazing things, especially in the '37 election. They produced a massive news sheet. But you saw the economic development of the country. It listed the economic development of the country within that period. And you had big maps of Ireland and all the various factories all over the place, and a guide to what each factory did. You're looking at towns and you're going, wow, I never knew that was there. I never knew that was there. And possibly the industries may have lasted to the '50s and '60s. You're looking at a kind of I suppose, a social and industrial history of the country, but you're looking at towns and places that you didn't know had any industry, and yet the country was fairly full of all sorts of industry.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that nowadays it's very unfashionable to give any credit to the self-sufficient industry Fianna Fáil ideology as once was. But I mean, yeah, I always think, I mean, was it entirely a bad thing?
Oh, not at all. And I think if you look at the moment, there's a debate going on within Fianna Fáil about Fine Gael, about the government deal. And, history is a huge part of it. A lot of the membership hark back to the massive house building under Lamass, the house building in the 30s, the industrial drives under Lamass and Dev and everything, as the difference between the two parties. They produced some fantastic graphics as well in the 40s with regard to the great house building campaigns. So you'd have a picture of a massive house, and the number of houses built by Fianna Fáil over this government period was X, and then you'd have a small little cottage to represent the number of houses built by Cumann Gael or Fine Gael. It's one of the reasons that there will be opposition, because they feel they've a totally different ideal and image of their party than a lot of the voters do, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right. But also, I mean, you can make the point without straying too far off our point here that since Lamass, Fianna Fáil has been the party of foreign investment and so on,
Yeah,
liberalisation of the economy.
yeah, very much so, very much so. And like it's like I found a picture of a hat factory in Castlebar, the hat factory in Castlebar, and it was from a Fianna Fáil publication for to mark 25 years of the party. You start getting into the history, and somebody contacted me and said, that factory literally employed thousands over the years, but also that factory was started by people who had fled from, I think, Czechoslovakia, from the Nazis. And then they came over and started the factory. So there was a whole history, not just the social history of Castlebar and this area and everything, but the history of who set it up and so on. It was just interesting.
Yes, that is fascinating, Alan. One of the areas as well is the proliferation of different Republican parties, particularly after the split in the Republican movement in 69 and 70. Would you have much material from groups like Republican Sinn Féin and the Irish Republican Socialist Party?
So the Workers' Party, or what became the Workers' Party, then you have the IRSP. Yeah, I've stuff from the IRSP. I've stuff from Republican Sinn Féin. And it's actually interesting. Some of the Republican Sinn Féin stuff would have been against the Good Friday Agreement. Some posters from Republican Sinn Féin for commemorations at Bodenstown. IRSP, I have a Brits Out poster from them. But again, they're not particularly successful, although the RSP are still going. But they would have been one of the smaller parties, certainly in the early 80s, to run in elections. Republican Sinn Féin, I don't think, is registered anymore. And I'm not sure if Tommaso Corron got his seat the last time in the locals in Galway. If you're thinking now, though, even how there's even been more splits and that you've ended up with Erigi splitting from Sinn Féin, Losser Darg, then you've Sarah, and just how since the Good Friday Agreement, even republicanism has split further and further as the groups opposed to the Good Friday Agreement have all split in various different ways.
As people can see on your site, you have an awful lot of material there from, as you say, the left wing to far left groups, and a lot of their theoretical material, like their magazines and stuff. Do you find that level of theoretical literature being produced by the smaller Republican groups, discussing like the ins and outs of how they see republicanism in the same way that the socialist groups do?
No, short answer. We see. I don't think the newspaper is. There was a time when the newspaper was big. It was your way of like you went to a march and you were accosted by somebody selling socialist worker, somebody selling the socialist or whatever, and there might be even you might be hijacked by the Spartacus or whoever might be there. Indeed, actually, it's funny. Some of the bigger marches in the past 10 years, you've had groups over from the UK as well selling their papers and giving out pamphlets as well. But the Republican groups, it would have been only Republican Sinn Féin, really. Their paper would be the most common. Now, then again, a lot of them are more active up in the north than they are in Dublin. But for instance, I've never seen a Sarah paper or paper from Lazar Darg. Although I do have some stuff. I don't even know if Ergy produce a paper. It's all online now. A lot of it, even on Public, has gone to magazine format.
One of the parties that I was hoping we could talk about, because it really sticks in my mind from my early teenage years, where they seem to be ubiquitous in local and European elections, were the Natural Law Party. And they only seem to exist for a certain amount of time and then they disappeared.
Yeah, but that was the national natural law was an international thing, and it came to Ireland. It was just so strange, and they ran in locals, they ran in Europeans. They had a solution for Northern Ireland. Looking through their material, the first priority of the Natural Law Party is to create a more coherent and positive society. This will be achieved by establishing a large group of experts practicing the transcendental meditation and yogic flying program at one location in Ireland. Scientific studies have shown such a group will significantly reduce societal stress, resulting in reduced crime and all other negative trends. As stress and inertia decline, the economy and the whole society will automatically begin to flourish. So you can imagine they didn't they didn't do too well, but it was just such an idea of. I remember seeing they had a party political broadcast and they had somebody doing yogic flying, but that would have been around the time of the war in Yugoslavia as well, and they had the suggestion that it would be solved by the Natural Law Party going in and teaching all the protagonists to do yogic flying.
You're bringing back a lot of memories here, Alan. I had totally forgotten about those guys, but yeah, I do remember now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, it's just like they were so off the wall. They were so off the wall. I'm not sure if it was religion or something, but it was certainly, and I think they're still going in certain parts of the world. But again, it was funny, when I was thinking of the communists and everything. But actually, they were another one allied to an international movement, probably a cult or something.
It's interesting with groups like the Natural Law Party that you're wondering, is it a practical joke? Is this serious? And from what I can remember, like they ran in an awful lot of constituencies and their
Oh, they did,
material
yeah,
was fairly well produced. Like they had
yeah.
some money behind them.
Oh, they did, yeah. But I don't know where the I don't know where the money came from. But again, it was an international thing. There's probably some guru in India or something like that. And yet, it's actually funny you talk about jokes. Like there's very few joke candidates. Do you know about Bernie Murphy? Bernie Murphy was an independent in 1985. For my sins, I worked down in Cork for a year. He was a sandwich board on Patrick Street. I worked in a shop on Patrick Street, and he was a sandwich board man on Patrick Street. But in 1985, a group of supposed lawyers and stuff paid his deposit for him to run in the local elections. His manifesto in 1985 was keep gas meters for people who want them, no service charges, improve medical and dental services, take the Gardaí off the border and put them back in the streets. It's Maggie Thatcher's border. Let her mind it. A ferry for Cork. Give people houses to live in and develop waste ground up Patrick's Hill as a park for children. Anyone who doesn't vote for me might be off their game. And he's right. Give Cork back its character. And his logo was himself in a pint of Murphy's. He ran in 1987, then in Cork South Central and Cork North Central. I have no respect for the people of North Central. Gerald Y. Goldberg, Fianna Fáil, after he was elected to the council. I think it's a disgrace to the people who voted for him. It's a total and absolute disgrace. Senator Sean O'Leary of Fine Gael. A plot. Bernard Allen Fine Gael. Sinister. Dick Brazil journalist. The people should be bloody well ashamed of themselves. Sean Beecher, the Labour Party. He wouldn't get elected to the Dáil in a 50-seater constituency, Senator Sean O'Leary, Fine Gael. So his policy by 87 included bringing Ryanair to Cork. Dublin should not be allowed to play All-Ireland semi-finals in Croke Park. No state cards, no pensions for sitting TDs. Abolishing the presidency, abolishing the Senate, build a bridge instead of a tunnel, what became the Jack Lynch tunnel, and stopping money lenders. And he was also asking you to, and his slogan was "Here's up 'em all." This thing you bought for 50 pence. My father was down in Cork at the time and bought it for me. But the first prize, keep this manifesto, and when Bernie is elected to the Dáil, write your name and address in it and send it to Bernie's home. And it would be included in a free celebration draw. First prize, £1,000 and 1 bottle of Cork Cream Sherry. Second prize, £200 and 3 bottles of Cork Cream Sherry. Third prize, £100 and 6 bottles of Cork Cream Sherry. So it's a thing. And you could also vote yourself into the money with them. This is a common thing on joke candidates, in that Liam Cashman is offering 50 to 1 against Bernie this time. Get your money on Bernie and vote yourselves the price of a holiday. It's the only way we'll ever be able to make politics pay. 500 for a tenner tax free, only a sucker wouldn't take it. Vote yourselves the money, you'll never vote better. He didn't
That's
get in.
that's some clever electoral strategies there, though.
Yeah, it's but anyway, that's one of the seeming joke candidates that was elected.
Yeah, I mean, we can entertain ourselves with the joke candidates, but like sometimes a small party does become a major party, and I remember back in the period we were talking about, the 80s and 90s, Sinn Féin was very much a fringe party, and now it's the largest single party in terms of votes in the last election. Have you seen a change, Alan, in the material that they've been putting out over those decades?
Oh yeah, of course. It's got more glossy. But even the profile of the candidates, like if you look at the 80s, it was kind of this is Paddy Joe. Paddy Joe was in the maze for 10 years for doing this, that, and the other. Or by the time the 2000s came, it was Paddy Joe is a small business owner and so on. It's appealing to a different demographic rather than just a Republican Party. It incidentally, actually, the fact that it was a Republican Party meant that it was able to do well nationally, in that it had people everywhere in the country, and something that, although Labour, have done well in times, it was never able to get into certain parts of the country where Sinn Féin were able to actually win seats there because of the republicanism. They were a small party, but the Greens are probably the most successful small parties because they were regarded as cranks, I suppose. When they started off as the Ecology Party, like it was just so weird, people caring about the environment. I suppose the environmental problem has grown as they've gone on, and they've been able to, even despite being wiped out in 2011, they've been able to come back because they're they're far more than a single issue party, but the environment is tied into them.
Yeah, the issue doesn't go away. And the other party that made it but then fell again was the Progressive Democrats.
Yeah, I wouldn't have counted them as a small party, funnily enough. They were massive. They were massive. I remember going to O'Malley's rallies and stuff. I was at their first ever public meeting out in Sutton. I was still in school. Like, they were attracting huge crowds. Like, do you remember the meetings after the election Sinn Féin had around the place before the COVID, and people locked out at Liberty Hall? There was crowds outside Liberty Hall, crowds outside various different places. Peter Stardy talking on the steps of Liberty Hall to them. That was like the PDs. There was such enthusiasm. And also, they had organisations in that they had TDs and councillors join them. They failed to put a proper organisation together, which is always a challenge for a new party, in that they assumed that they just get votes without having much of an organisation in some places. So they didn't have the branch network, the way, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and whatever had come-ons, and they didn't have that branch network. Possibly they thought they were above it, but they didn't have that same network and didn't set down the roots that they could have in '86 onwards, and that cost them in the long run. That they
Now,
became
that's very
pragmatic.
interesting. It's kind of the opposite of Sinn Féin, isn't it? Because they had the activists first and then the TDs, as opposed
Yes,
to
exactly, because the PDs had a lot of high-profile people, and again, O'Malley was charismatic. certainly to some people, and they offered something totally different in the 80s anyway.
It's interesting. I mean, the ideological climate today, I wouldn't say is such that you could get a lot of people elected by saying we want more free markets and we want liberalization of the economy and we want more capitalism. There doesn't seem to be the market for that there was in the 80s.
Well, I don't think that was primarily, well, one, we're not as taxed. The tax rate was massive. But two, it wasn't necessarily economic. It was at the same time Charlie was opposing the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and also the divorce. The PDs would have been in favour of divorce, would have been a lot more socially liberal than Fianna Fáil, and indeed most of Fine Gael. They would have also had a very different attitude to the North than Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. They were a lot more accommodating towards unionism and an agreed solution as opposed to the other parties. And that was one of the reasons they attracted a lot of people, was that they had a different idea on the North and social issues. It wasn't just the economic thing.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, I had totally forgotten that, but you're quite right. I mean, I was thinking more about the 2000s PDs, with Mary Harney and Michael McDowell and so on.
Yeah, no. They also had decent people. Not that Harney McDowell weren't, but there was good, decent people like Peadar Clohessy and Pierce Wise and Bobby Malloy and so on that were seen as good, decent people. You know, that's what happens as well if you're a party that has a couple of issues, or indeed a single issue party. Once some of the issues that attract people get solved or sorted, then you're left with the other parts of your the other part, which is the economic part. So it was that's partially why they ended up that, because the other initial attractions were gone or done.
It's so interesting. I mean, if your own policies become mainstream, you might lose out electorally.
Oh yeah, like indeed, if you look at the Greens, oh, the Progressive Democrats were the Greens. The Progressive Democrats had the real party of the environment. They were, even in 2007, I think it was, some Fianna Fáil had sending around a leaflet to calculate your carbon footprint. So all the parties went. Lucinda Creighton produced some green stuff, anti-green stuff, not anti-green, but I'm greener than the Greens type of thing. Everybody was producing green stuff because the environment was such a big issue. So the environment, they tried to take it off the Greens, I suppose.
Alan, I think most people are familiar with your local TD or councillor sending in a calendar with their face on it, or when there's, a World Cup or European Championship or the All Ireland Championships coming up, a list of fixtures with their face on it.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered any other types of material from councillors and TDs, more unusual stuff that they've tried to brand themselves with?
Well, there's some stuff I couldn't keep. Like Simon Harris was handing out oranges with stickers during the Bray Station or Greystone Station during the last election. I've toothpaste. I've toothpaste from a chap called Keith Redmond, who was a dentist who was running for Fine Gael at the time. And it was just little tiny packets of Colgate with his stickers on it. I've mints from Neil Richmond. I've a harmonica from Sinn Féin. It's funny actually how climate influences stuff. A couple of raincoats and stuff from various different canvassing teams, and then they might have given me a raincoat after the election of a Lynn Boylan umbrella. I go over. There's a massive collection in Lisbon. It's known as the ephemera archive, and I've gone over there twice now. I remember the first time I went over, my wife said to me, "You might get out some ideas about storage." I hadn't an idea of the scale of the collection, so I went over there and got picked up at the airport, myself and another fella. Your man has a depository, so if you've stuff, you can leave it. They've a place at the back of a bookshop, and we were brought in there, and that's where people leave off material for the collection. And it's just, I was holding Marxist Leninist flags, and there was all sorts of things. And then following morning, we got picked up and brought out to this guy's house, which is about 70 or 80 miles outside Lisbon. And his home is a former winery. So if you think of the basement and everything is, it's cool, it's perfect for storing stuff. So you're going in, and on the wall is posters from the Sandinista, or from El Salvador, from Nicaragua. There's stuff from Nazis. There's literally everything. And they had candles, beer, umbrellas, like loads and loads of different things. But one of the most common things in Southern Europe is fans. Politicians giving out fans to cool you down. Anyway, finished the first place, and then he said, "Come on, we'll go next door." So he had, over time, he bought the next door neighbours, and then bought the their neighbours, and then bought their neighbours. So there was basically he had 5 houses full of material. And then last year we went over again, and he had a warehouse as well, full of stuff. It's just amazing. So anyway, I don't have a warehouse or anything, but
Not planning on buying 5 other houses.
no, I don't think so. Not unless I win the lotto. I was meant to get a shed for Valentine's Day, actually. Never quite materialised with all the COVID and everything.
Could you see yourself eventually donating all this stuff to the National Archive or university?
I'd love to set up something locally. Love the county council said, right, because people do politics and stuff in school. I initially thought when I started doing exhibitions and stuff that it was just going to be political nerds like myself. There's a lot more to it than that. Like, for instance, I grew up in Dunleary, so I can do one in Dunleary. There'll be nostalgia, but you have local history, you have everything. It's a far wider appeal than I had thought previously. It's a far wider appeal. And it's educational as well. Like, you can teach people how to, because obviously I've the contents of polling booths and all the rest as well, that you can teach people how to vote. You could teach pupils doing, I think, social and political education as well as politics. I think SPHE, I think. I can't remember the subject name, but you can do, there's a lot more to it than, there's an educational aspect as well. I'd love to, geez, if I won the lotto, I'd set up a museum in the morning, because there's so much. If, like, for instance, like, you had the Doyle 100, the 100 years of the women's vote, and I was doing, I was helping out, and there's Sinead McCool had an exhibition. I think it's back in Dublin Castle, but it started in Dublin Castle to do with the 100 years of women voting. She was looking for material from various different female TDs and senators. But it was just interesting. I was going through boxes of stuff. I sort by constituency and smaller parties and things, but I'd never sorted by gender. And I was amazed. Literally, lack of female stuff compared to our successful female candidates compared to male candidates was unreal. So you learn from that. So that was a huge thing to be able to scan a lot of material, because a lot of that exhibition is digital. But you know what, geez, I'd love to open a museum, but whether there's a living in it, I don't know, unless a council or somebody was involved. And then with all this COVID carry on and I don't think we'll be having much spare money for various things like that.
So, Alan, just to finish off, is there any other more unusual and interesting characters from the last general election we recently had that caught your eye?
The last election was the first one where we had the National Party, the Irish Freedom Party, and then you had Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters running. And hopefully, in a few years' time, we'll look back at that material and go, "Oh my God, that was mad." But there was also some independents, a couple of anti-5G independents. Like, there was a lady called Mary O'Donnell who ran in Sligo Leitrim, and she was looking for LED street lights, smart meters, masts, Wi-Fi, RF radiation from devices, 5G, and so on. She was against all sorts of things like that. I suppose since the deposit, years ago, you had to pay a fairly hefty deposit to run. Since the deposit is gone, you've got a wider array of people and parties because of that. A lot of fairly right wing independents. I suppose my favourite one, actually, and it was I was blessed because I'm in Dublin Southwest, was a fella called Colm O'Keefe. His logo was a Vatican flag and a communist flag intertwined. And it was calm unity, vote for Colm O'Keefe for the right to marry and a collectivist republic. And it was just very unusual. He was a collectivist Republican. That should be under the monarchy. Left-wing parties have collectivist economic policies, but individualist social policies, and right-wing parties have individualist economic policies and collectivist social policies. What's needed is a party with collectivist economic and collectivist social policies. A republic, as I see it, is merely a point on the continuum between absolute monarchy at one end of the spectrum and pure democracy, which is what Ireland is today in constitutional terms, at the other end of the spectrum. A republic is a democracy with a little bit of monarchy, in the same way that a constitutional monarchy is a monarchy with a bit of democracy. A united 32 county independent democratic Republic of Ireland should have its own Irish monarchy for its own Irish loyalist population. The Irish monarchy should apply only to the Irish loyalist population, not to the Irish nationalist population, nor to the land of Ireland, neither. But as we would have the same monarch as Great Britain has, because we would share a common monarchy that gives you a united kingdom, as well, of course, as a united Ireland. So that was a bit confused.
That all sounds fairly clear and straightforward.
Doesn't it?
I think I found my political home, Alan.
Oh, have you? Yeah. That was just weird and got massive thing. But there's been some like not last year. Was it last year's local election? There was a fellow who was looking for a new currency for Kildare. And he was serious,
Yeah.
That it was partially to do with shopping and stuff, but that was the best leaflet from. There was also, it was like some of the right wing lads. There was some lad who was Ireland's only charioteer.
Very good.
Yeah, I guess the National Party and all that, and of course Peter Casey and all that. But really, it's hard to beat your man's communist Vatican stuff.
Maybe to finish off, I'm just reminded there of Clifford T. Reid, if you remember him, and his very poorly designed posters.
Yeah, I've been in contact with him a few times. He's none of the posters left. I have one of his leaflets, which to stop the paedophiles was such a thing. But those posters literally went up and got taken down with student houses immediately. Everybody took them because they were seen as a collector's item. But certainly it was a slogan that caught the eye.
Well, unfortunately for Clifford, people looking at them posters, and I don't know if people can remember them from the time they were black and white, the assumption being that this is a local campaign to keep this guy who is a paedophile out of their area.
Yeah.
Rather than this is the candidate opposed to paedophilia.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's actually a very nice fella, actually. I think, I was going to meet, I'm not sure, he's from Kildare somewhere, but he's, I remember I did an exhibition, it was due to do with this year as well, the Newbridge June Fest, but obviously it was online only, but met a few people who'd had his posters last year when I was talking to people in there. Nobody give one up though.
Oh, they're like gold dust.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Alan, I think we've come to the end of the show, and we really appreciate you being on today, and thank you very much. And for anyone who's listening in, Alan has a new podcast that's starting, talking about all these issues about small political parties, about election paraphernalia, and also, if you'd like to check out Alan's blog, it's irishelectionliterature.com, and you're also on Twitter as well. So definitely worth a look for anyone who's interested in Irish politics. Thank you very much for listening. On behalf of myself, Carl Brennan, and my co-presenter, John Dorney, if you'd like to listen to any previous episodes of the show, you can go to our website, irishhistoryshow.ie. You can follow us on Twitter, @IrishHistoryPod, and follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Irish History Show. We'd really appreciate it if you get the chance to rate and review the show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, thank you very much for listening.